So
we're gonna start off. We've been sitting there talking our heads off, y'all. For those of y'all who try to check in, the internet again is giving us some hassles, and we are having to be at a outside venue with a lot of background noise, a lot of disturbance. So I want to apologize for that. But these are the conditions here, some of which we'll talk about. There's some special conditions here in Egypt. The post kind of revolutionary society is not as open as what those who engaged in the revolution in 2011 had hoped. But the struggle is ongoing. There's still a bunch of folks who are struggling for a truly democratic society. I don't mean the bourgeois democratic madness that some of y'all in the U.S. audience may be accustomed to, but something much more profound, deep, that gets to the grassroots. So folks are still fighting for that. But in the meantime, we're dealing with the conditions kind of post that world, post that kind of setback within the movement. And it's had some ramifications on how we are moving, what we're doing. And I think some of this internet, kind of pieces we talked about on Tuesday is a part of that. For those of you who might just be checking in, again, I'm Kali Akuno, Executive Director of Cooperation Jackson, here as part of the Grassroots Global Justice Alliance delegation, which is a part of the It Takes Roots delegation. And It Takes Roots is a form of alliances of four major alliances: Climate Justice Alliance, Indigenous Environmental Network, Grassroots Global Justice Alliance, and Right to the City. And for this particular COP, we've been joined by several other kind of sister alliances as part of the It Takes Roots delegation. I'm gonna need help again, bro, for some of them.
Yep.
We got the Just Transition Alliance. We got La Via Campesina. We got the Global March of Women. We have the Black Hive, and then the Indigenous Climate Action. Our folks up in Canada.
Yep,
right?
that's our First Nations in Canada, and then Indigenous Environmental Network.
Indigenous Environmental Network. So we are here all together, advancing some common demands, common platform, which you'll be hearing about through all of these broadcasts. But some of the key issues are indigenous sovereignty, land back, climate reparations, ending militarization, particularly U.S. militarization all over the globe. And so folks are clear that's not just some abstract piece. The U.S. military is the largest single polluter on the planet. So it's very much tied to the overall struggle around climate justice. We are here all together pushing this agenda forward and pushing for a broader agenda of human rights, in this case, really focusing in on political prisoners and prisoners of conscience all over the world. And for some of us, within our struggle, the Black liberation struggle, trying to bring also our political, our prisoners of war home and our political exiles as well. But here in Egypt, there's some particular struggles that are going on that we've been trying to elevate and lift up, particularly the case of the Brother Allah, but there are thousands of political prisoners here that hopefully, those of you who've been kind of following the process have heard, The Guardian and BBC and some of these other kind of major liberal to progressive media outlets give some cover to as folks are trying to press, particularly on European governments, to use their power and influence over Egypt, and they do have a lot. So folks are clear. I just want to name and articulate that, to make it clear, Egypt is the second largest recipient of U.S. foreign aid by far and away. Number one is the settler colonial state of Israel, and then Egypt is number two, and that's not by accident. So the U.S. could put a lot of pressure if they wanted to make them move off some things. and it's our job to kind of bring some of the stuff which we've been doing and will continue to do while we're here. But that's just a introduction, just a little backdrop. We'll get into more of kind of the day-to-day pieces of what's going on here, how this process is continually being captured, abused, distorted, in the main. But our point is always here to talk about the real solutions that our people are crafting, working on, have been working on, and highlighting the work that we're doing on the grassroots level. So on that end, we're going to have a couple of speakers tonight. First up is a comrade, brother, done some work with back in the day, George Galvez, who's the executive director of Courage out in the Bay Area. George has been putting in a lot of work in the Bay Area and, nationally for many moons now, particularly focusing on the struggle of our folks, behind bars and those who return to the community to make sure society doesn't continue to criminalize them, marginalize them, and exploit them. And he's worked, with all of us and none and many other formations over the years, putting in that work. So I don't know if you want to do some more to introduce yourself, brother, before we get into some questions.
It's all good. Thank you, brother, first of all, for having me on, man. Much love to all your audience, all the comrades doing this video podcast. It's been a pleasure to reconnect with you too, man. We did some good work together back in the day that I'm still proud of. You know what I'm saying?
Very much so myself.
And know that the legacy of that and the seeds that were planted with those young students from East Oakland back in the day are continuing forward. I see some of them out there having their own families and working as activists now. You know what I'm saying? So, yeah, man, it's been a pleasure. So, in terms of just giving a little more background about who I am, as Brother Kali mentioned, I'm a co-founder and executive director of Courage, Community Network for Restorative Justice. Also a co-founder of All of Us or None. I serve as board chair for Legal Services for Prisoners with Children, and I'm on the board of the formerly incarcerated convicted peoples and families movement. More importantly, I'm a formerly incarcerated person, and I have the distinct privilege of working with young people with very similar lived experiences as myself. So the mission of Courage is to unlock the leadership of young people to dream beyond bars. We say close youth prisons, build youth leaders, and so our what we try to do is elevate their voice and power and their family members really to be the change makers, and to really dismantle the systems of criminalization, state violence, and mass incarceration, the prison industrial complex. So, and what I guess maybe that might be a cool little segue into just kind of talking a little bit about, the dynamics in Oakland, right? Like Courage, we were born out of the gang injunction organizing, a little over 12 years ago. And we began to mobilize the defendants in the Fugo gang injunction. And I think part of why we were successful in becoming one of the very first community organizing efforts in the nation to fully defeat a gang injunction was because we weren't just organizing about what we were saying no to, but we were saying yes to. We said no to gang injunction zones that criminalize particularly Black and brown young people, but yes to this concept of youth empowerment zones that we have since evolved to what we're calling youth power zones. But additionally, what we also knew is that all the empirical research and evidence demonstrated that gang injunctions are not actually impactful in terms of improving public safety. What we know is that's true for police. Like the safest communities don't have the most police, they got the most resources, right? And so mass incarceration, policing, police terrorism, criminalization, all of those are really about tactics about maintaining hegemony. In the case of the U.S., it's about white supremacy, right? It's about maintaining subordination of Black and brown people, and we know that there, prisons are essentially new age slave plantations. We still have legalized slavery in the U.S. You know what I mean? It just came up in the election just yesterday, right? So, at least 4 of the states that had it up on the ballot decided to finally end it in their state constitutions, right? But there's still a number of states, including California, that continue to maintain that practice, right? So what we see in our communities, what we see in the U.S. is kind of a microcosm of what we see on the global level. And obviously the U.S. is the most implicated player. You mentioned they're the biggest polluter, but we got more prisons than any other nation state in the entire globe and world too, right? But yet what we know is that the climate crisis and the people who have been most impacted, the ones who are also being the most criminalized, the ones who have been most impacted by police terrorism, militarization, and people are being disappeared, executed, and incarcerated for the audacity to speak up in defense of air, in defense of land, in defense of water, in defense of life, right? And so we can't really have an authentic conversation about climate justice without talking about human rights. Those issues are inextricably connected, right? And so, that's kind of what we were doing today, right? Today was dedicated to human rights, and we were lifting up these issues, including our loved one, Brother Allah, right, who is currently incarcerated here in Egypt as as an advocate for free speech and democracy here in Egypt. Who was part of that the Arab Spring a little over a decade ago, and since the military coup here in Egypt, has been incarcerated, tortured, and has been on a hunger strike for over 200 days, and has most recently started to refuse water. So he's almost he's like very much on the verge of dying,
Right.
and he's willing to die in order to make the point and bring attention to this issue, right? So the irony of this happening right here in the COP, being located here, I don't think is any coincidence either. It seems like it's very intentional as a way of really being able to suppress activism and communities and peoples and frontline communities that have been most impacted by the climate crisis, to suppress those voices. You know what I mean? Because it is a militarist environment. So the irony of us having to have permits for every single action, that we're then relegated, we're only allowed 30 minutes, that we're relegated to a certain space that they tell us that we're allowed to, that we have to practically provide scripts of what we're going to say. We're not allowed to name bad actors. We're not allowed to, including multinational corporations, corrupt politicians and electeds, or nation states. We're not allowed to say any of those names in this space. Is almost an inherent contradiction to the whole purpose around, the whole spirit of protest, and marching and rallying and engaging in these kinds of activities. So, it's really kind of absurd. It's a little frustrating in terms of next year being excited at the UAE and, Dubai, and that this seems to be some of a trend of what we can foresee in the future with these COP events. So, this is my first one, man. It's been very informative for me. On the flip side of that, I'll say, like, I'm sure your audience is familiar with the expression ACAB, right? All cops are bad. Well, that applies to the COP conferences as well, not just the police. You know what I'm saying? It's all cops are bad, because basically the bad acting nations are the decision makers, and they're not going to police themselves. You know what I'm saying? Just like the pigs in the U.S. And then all the big oil companies, it's a pay to play kind of scheme, and they're basically there, and they're basically the ones negotiating and carving out these agreements. And communities, frontline folks, are not invited to that table, right? So that's why we say all cops are bad, and that applies to the COP27, and that applies to these COP conferences. It's somewhat of a farce, but on the flip side of that, what I can say is that all of the freedom fighters that are here, and all the water protectors, the land defenders, those who are fighting for air quality, those who are fighting for fundamental human rights and democracy, those who are fighting for climate reparations, man, they're badass. So all cops are bad, but the activists are badass out here, man. So I'm been learning a lot, spending a lot of time with you, brother. I've been just amazed by the international political landscape analysis that you have, and you've laced me up on a lot of game just this week, man. So I feel very appreciative of that, as well as all the other comrades here. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, man. I've been humbled and honored to be a part of it, and I feel reinvigorated to really bring some of this energy back home. And I think that it's really, it's all relative, you know what I'm saying? But I feel like there's a lot of lessons and teachings. It's inspiring to see the intersectionality, the interconnectedness of our movements, to see that it's bigger than Oakland, it's bigger than the U.S., you know what I mean? We're just a small piece of it, you know what I mean? Even though the U.S. is such a big culprit in so much of this bullshit that we're witnessing, and that we actually have privilege, you know what I mean? As Black and brown folks, as Black and Indigenous people, we feel like we're at the bottom of the U.S. stratification and caste system oftentimes, right? But yet, by the virtue of us having U.S. passports, we got a little bit of privilege. So how we've been able to leverage that privilege to be able to speak out, around some of these issues that other folks would be criminalized and
Pop real quick,
pop real
right.
quick, man. You know what I'm saying? You know, any Egyptian or anyone from an Arab state would definitely get popped real quick. We're able to talk about these things and know that we can safely go home. You know what I'm saying? And so I feel like we have an incumbent responsibility to do that. And so yeah, it's all relative. Internationally, the value of a U.S. passport, you know, can come in handy. You know what I mean? So that's what we're doing out here is flexing that shit a little bit.
To the extent we can.
To the extent that we can.
So, what you bringing home, bro? I mean, what you taking back to the folks that you working with from this experience?
Yeah, man. Well, shit, you know, I've been you know, pumping you for all kinds of stuff all week, man. So I got, like I said, I got a lot of game from my brother Kali, man. You know what I'm saying? My comrade here, and all the other comrades, the relationships, the networks, you know, opportunities to kind of build. And I feel like what I'm doing is bringing the knowledge back to my community. You know, we operate in silos sometimes, man, but that expression of Mitakiasa on my relations, that we, you know, that expression of Ilakesh, that you are a reflection of me and I'm a reflection of you. That idea, you know, of being interconnected and interdependent has to be more than just a concept. It's something that we have to really live. You know what I mean? It's a way of life. It's a way of being with each other. And so, you know, we have to reflect in our organizing back home in local communities. You know, we have to reflect the world that we're trying to create. And so be able to bring that, you know, bring that back home, bring some of those teachings and make sure that we're mobilizing in solidarity with comrades around the world. And knowing that we got a bigger base, man, our base grows, you know what I'm saying? It's like shit, man. Sometimes we feel real lonely out there. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, you know, you and I have talked, and as we've acknowledged, not all skin folk is kinfolk, and a lot of the ways that they're effective these days is through these neo-colonial agents, folks who look like us but serve the oppressor's agenda, right? And so sometimes we can feel very isolated in the work we do, but when you get together with really, you know, just solid comrades, man, from across the country and from across the world, man, you don't feel so alone. You know what I mean? And so what I'm also bringing home is, like I said, a feeling of being reinvigorated, some energy, some fresh energy to really get things fired up out there in the town. A commitment to hold, you know, an event that me and others have been kind of talking about. We're going to do an event to really connect our political prisoners back home with brother Allah here in Egypt. You know what I'm saying? And use that platform to put pressure on our elected officials, because as you mentioned already, the U.S. has so much power. We're the, you know, the second, you know, largest provider of international aid to Egypt. You know what I'm saying? After Israel, so that's something that we can leverage, right? So we need to put pressure on our elected officials that you know, not freeing him will fundamentally change the relationship of the U.S. and Egypt. So there's a lot of opportunities of things that we can do, you know, and so, you know, it's the power of the people, man, right? We say all power to the people, and it's the power of the people that will move the world, man. So, you know, when we can make that happen, it'll be a motherfucking takeover, not a makeover. You feel me? So
yeah, that's it, bro. That's it. I don't know if we're waiting for one other person to see all the clear. Sister Sawatu, who many of y'all might know in our audience in particular, to see if she can join us. She was trying to get some food. She was denied that earlier, so hopefully she's taking care of that. But you know, now I just want to move on for a few more minutes to just kind of outline, I think, where some things are at. Now, we did this on Tuesday, the first one on Tuesday. And it was clear that the Republicans were going to make some gains, you know, in the midterm elections. It wasn't clear what the outcome was going to be. And point of fact, it's still not completely clear, you know, which one of those two parties is going to control the Senate. But we need to be clear that it, particularly as it relates to climate legislation and what this particular administration, the Biden administration, can push for, the box for that has been severely limited, you know, by the midterm elections. Now, you know, in truth, their administration was not pushing anything near what we need. and definitely not what our movement has been calling for. And the most that they could push in practice, or at least got passed to this point, have been through like an appropriations bill, uh, um, and then here more recently, and I guess what they're touting as their main substance was through this inflation bill. But we should note that at least for the next 2 years, uh, the only thing that the Biden administration, and to a greater extent the Democratic Party, at least on the federal, is going to be able, are really going to be able to push, are little curbs and little tinkers here and there that they can execute by executive decree. And that will be challenged. Everybody needs to be very clear about that. That's going to be challenged tooth and nail by the Republicans, and then more point of fact, is going to be blocked almost at probably every turn by the Supreme Court. And we got to remember that this Supreme Court basically just gutted the Clean Air Act, right? And weakened the power of the Environmental Protection Agency is one of the major things that they decided on during this last term. And they have a couple of cases coming up where they very much deliberately and intentionally are trying to remove any and all the kind of environmental protections, and more specifically, the ability of government, particularly the U.S. government, to intervene to curb the private sector from making choices around if it's going to pollute or not to pollute, and then who would be responsible for any cleanup or any damages to communities. And the way that we know that they are rolling, they want to drill, baby, drill. That's the Republicans' philosophy, and that is where their money, some of their money fundamentally is made. They're much more tied to the petrochemical industry than the Democrats. But don't get it wrong, the Democrats are deeply involved in that industry and that sector as well. So they're going to head in that direction. And challenge them, at least on a kind of a immediate structural level, is the power of the executive, the power of the presidency. But we need to recognize that that's limited. So the real power, as you've heard me say here before, and I'm going to keep saying, the real power is between us, right? And building a strong movement that speaks to our interests and possesses the power to check them and to redirect things in the manner that we want them to go. So keep that in mind. Now, what does that mean for this process around COP? John Kerry spoke yesterday on Wednesday. Biden is supposed to be speaking tomorrow. What we've heard, that I would say that the highlight for the most part is John Kerry announced a major carbon trading deal or proposal yesterday. Like that was their big, shing ding, right? That they are going to basically open up Wall Street and all of its financial mechanisms on, really an international scale. And so folks are clear, if you're not familiar, some of the challenges we've been having. Hope folks stick with us and see this through. But what is carbon trading? Just so folks will be clear. It is allowing polluters to continue to pollute, but to be in relationship with a country, foreign country that has forest reserves or wildlife reserves or wetlands, to negotiate managing those, basically buying them in essence, and keeping them from being stewarded by primarily indigenous people, so that they can come in and make money through monocropping these areas. So this is a very insidious plan. It's a major land grab.
Yep.
is fundamentally what it is. It's a deeper extension of colonialism. We need to be very clear about that. Under the guise of allegedly fixing our problem with carbon emissions, when in effect it's just deepening the very process and the very system, the system of capitalism, was got us into this crisis in the first place. So that's what their major proposal is. We're just getting quote unquote more nation states on board with a particular scheme around carbon trading that they've been pushing. There's different schemes that different players in the game, the major players in the game, play that they're contesting with, but because the United States is still the major player as it relates to international finance, more nations are going to gravitate in their direction than not. And a good part of this, people need to understand, is that their advocacy, this being the Biden administration, their advocacy much more in this COP is centered around the repivoting of the world energy markets, caused by their response to the inter-imperialist rivalry which is taking place in the Ukraine. So I'm naming that. We'll talk about that a little bit more as time goes on. And from stand tomorrow, Biden, I think, is supposed to be dropping uh, um, a new deal on Egypt, offering them. I'm assuming we got to look at more of the details, and we'll find out more tomorrow and the days after that. But coming up with some grand kind of solar power scheme and initiative, which of course American companies would benefit from. And folks need to be keen on this. Why this is important. If they can create a captured market, they can create a consolidated, monopolized market. It gives U.S. companies more of a foothold and more footing in the overall game around, climate capitalism, because folks should know that the vast majority of solar panels in the world today are produced by China. They're not produced by the United States. So if you've been hearing a lot of this rhetoric around the United States trying to reindustrialize, bring more of kind of high technology or smart technology back into the productive base of the United States, we have to remember that they have to kind of construct markets for their high price goods that they're going to create. And they're right now, under present terms and conditions, want everybody to understand, if they bring back some of this, quote unquote, they bring back some of this production of, microchips or computers and cameras and digital things, they're going to have to do so under the terms and conditions and labor standards and environmental standards that currently apply within the United States. And that means if you have to pay, a technical worker $25 to $50 an hour, which they should get paid. Let me be clear about that. Which they should get paid, if not more. Because that's not their true value. But that means that the end product is going to be more than it would be if it was made in China or Vietnam or, Laos or Cambodia or, somewhere on the African continent. And if, the only way they can do that is to structure some guaranteed markets. And it sounds like this deal is structuring a guaranteed market. And it'll more than likely, once we evaluate it and once the details come out, more than likely, it's just going to be, I'm not going to use the word I was thinking of. More than likely, it's just going to be horse trading. And what do I mean by that? So remember we said, beginning of this piece, Egypt is the second largest recipient of U.S. foreign aid. Egypt receives more foreign aid than all of Africa put together every year on an annual basis. People need to know that and understand that. It does that because it occupies a very strategic position geopolitically in the U.S.'s management of its empire, right? It controls the Suez Canal, and I think folks remember, from last year, maybe 2 years ago, or last year, the strategic value of that canal, how many goods are transported through the Suez Canal, through the Mediterranean, they go to Europe and then further afield, where that one little boat got lodged up and there was a backlog for up to a year of ships, for certain products and goods and services not being rendered. And then there's the military side of this equation. This region, historically, at least since the advent of global capitalism, so we're talking about going back to at least the 1400s, 1500s. If you want to control the world, you got to control this region. It's at the major crossroads between Africa, Asia, and the European peninsula. That's not a continent. Let's make sure we get that shit clear. Europe ain't a continent, it's a peninsula. So if you want to understand that, Egypt is very central to that, and Israel has also become very central to that. A large part of why Western powers have always kind of supported this particular settler colonial project is for its military applications to have a foothold in this particular region and its control over valuable sea lanes and air lanes. The sea lanes were first primarily historically, in the warfare of the 19th century and before. If you wanted to rule the world, you had to have sea power. That's why the British Empire was so dominant for about 2.5 centuries, because they commanded the seas. The United States took that over, but then added air power to it. And the United States is still basically the only country on the planet which has a command, through its battleship, kind of deployment and its air superiority, to kind of control regions like this. And you got to have all the bases and the setup to do that. So Egypt is very important to them. That's why it kind of gets this disproportionate amount of aid. But it's also why, let's be clear, Egypt is not democratic. It's not democratic because the people in Egypt don't want democracy. It's not democratic because the imperialists don't want democracy. So that's a problem that we have to help solve in the United States by advancing revolution in our own country to create democratic space anywhere and everywhere where the U.S. imperialism is at play. And right now, that's damn near every inch of the globe. So we got a major role to play on here. Well, I keep saying here like I'm at home in the United States. Well, we got a major role to play. Our movements have a major role to play. So, but back to Biden. So he's going to come here tomorrow. He's going to be throwing a bunch of cash around. He's going to be throwing a bunch of aid around, trying to lock some stuff in. But we need to recognize that his actual ability to negotiate now, because of what happened during these midterm elections, is going to be very limited. And this is a critical piece. I want to just bring home to all those young activists out there with, 350 or what's some of the other organizations out there that I'm forgetting, Movement Generation and Sunrise. Folks have put a tremendous amount of stock in towards trying to reshape policy. And there's an important role for that to play, but we always need to make assessment of time, space, and conditions. And these particular time, space, and conditions, we're going to have to build more strength and power outside of our kind of lobbying kind of dimensions and really put pressure on the system, first and foremost in our communities, by organizing more people to build alternatives, but also be prepared to fight a long distance fight. So saying that, I think it's critical for us to understand that when it comes to negotiations, I think for the rest of this COP and looking forward, probably for the next two, the major players people need to understand are going to be the European Union and China. And their role is only going to, their kind of increased role in negotiation, I would argue, and that can be subject to debate. That's going to just heighten, particularly as China rises and take more of a center stage in this process, this accelerated path towards war and inter-imperialist rivalry that the United States has clearly announced. And I mean, both parties have clearly announced that they've been moving in that direction. I want everybody here, if you've never heard of it, look at President Obama's pivot to Asia strategy, which Trump basically picked up and put his own spin and flavor on, and Biden is continuing. And a large part of, I would argue, about what's going on in Ukraine is really just a prelude and some practice for the larger show, which is the inter-imperialist conflict with China, which both parties are very much openly acknowledging is on the table right now, and they're getting prepared for. And that's a central backdrop to a lot of things that's being discussed here at this conference. The last thing I'll mention, at least for today, um, one of the ways that this whole piece is really played out at this particular COP is the increased role and presence of the nuclear power industry, right? Like, they are everywhere. Uh, they're basically buying young people to just wear shirts, different promotions about nuclear power.
And trying to promote it as clean energy, man.
Speak to
I
it.
like the transition from
Oh.
oil and fracking, and they're trying to say, well, this is the clean,
Right.
This is the clean alternative. I mean, come on, man. Didn't we learn anything from Chernobyl? Didn't we learn anything? I mean, come on, man.
Nothing.
It's scary, man. And right in California, we have a nuclear power plant owned and operated by Pacific Gas and Electric, right? Built on a fault line, on a fucking fault line, the Diablo Canyon fault line, man. So, this is dangerous stuff that we're playing with, man. So, there's no way to clean that shit. You know what I'm saying? There's no way to clean it. So it's scary, man. One other thing I want to kind of just add on to just another dimension to this conversation that we didn't really get a chance to dive into yet, man, is the role of the mega nonprofit NGOs, the poverty pimps, basically, who are advancing this greenwashing. And people hear this green rhetoric and framework and language, and it sounds real good. Sounds real good if you haven't really done your homework and you haven't really dived into the weeds, which very few people are going to do. You know what I'm saying? And they're promoting this kind of rhetoric and bullshit. You know what I'm saying? And they have a pretty significant presence here, and they're receiving billions of dollars from big oil and other multinational corporations. So, we got to beware about those false solutions. We got to beware about the fake greens. You know what I mean? And these poverty pimps, man, the same shit that they do on a local level. We know a little something about some of these poverty pimps out there. You know what I mean? We talked about neocolonialism and those folks who look like us but serve the oppressor. But we're seeing that with a lot of these NGOs, man. That's one of the things I peeped and learned out here over this past week as well, man. So, let's talk about it. I'm gonna name some, man. Off top, Nature Conservancy. Like the name sounds real fucking pretty, man. Beware of these fools. You know what I'm saying?
Right,
and there's a whole bunch of others. There's a long list. So, that's just one thing that folks need to kind of get laced up on too.
Right. And we'll do some more of that the next couple of days. We're still gonna try to figure out how to do more of these, y'all. I know folks have been getting on my case about, sharing back and getting on. We're gonna try to make it happen as best we can. I still think that probably the piece is going to be doing these more in the middle of the day and recording them ahead of time and then putting them out, which limits, some folks' participation on questions and things like that. But, we'll figure it out to make sure that, those of us who have the privilege and the honor to be here, with other comrades, that we bring as much of this knowledge, information, and experience, back. So we can build the movements we need on the ground, back home to make our contribution, to the struggle. So I'm going to end it there for tonight, y'all. We will definitely try to catch Sawatu. If it may be she may be the first one that we record to make sure to get her voice and experience into the fray. So folks get to know, if you don't know her, get to know her. I want to appreciate my brother and comrade George for joining us and taking the time. Unfortunately, he's going to be leaving us, so he won't be here for the next week. But it has been an honor to catch up with you again, brother, to reconnect on the level that we have. To those of y'all School of Social Justice folks who are out there, we're not making a unilateral decision, but we are putting our heads together to plan something out in the Bay in 2024, and it's going to be Courage's new spot. So be on the lookout for that, and y'all better start supporting Courage more and more. Some of y'all are adults and got jobs, so y'all can become sustainers and donors. Don't sleep on that. Um, so yeah, be on the lookout for that. I'm looking forward to it. We can get past the rhetoric and the complaints and the BS talking we've been doing to each other the past couple of years, and just make that happen. So, if folks want to like form a committee or something like that to help us plan it, we're gonna put out that information, and then we're gonna start doing more team ups in terms of training operations. To keep building the connection. So, want to tell y'all the next scheduled time that will be boarded or unscheduled. So be on the lookout. On like YouTube and Facebook. I'm gonna try to, my old ass is gonna try to figure out this Twitter. I heard all the complaints. I'm gonna figure it out one way or get somebody younger to help me figure it out. Y'all know I don't like some of this tech shit, but I'm gonna do my best to make it work, to get it further out there, to get the message further out there. But y'all can help by amplifying it too and just doing the link and putting it out there, to spare me some work and some time. But we'll be back next scheduled time, next Tuesday, same time, and then next Thursday, same time. We're gonna try to put more folks into the mix, all throughout. And if we can get a better internet where there's not like dance music in the discotheque, we'll bring more folks on, so we can go more depth in some of these subjects. So thank y'all for tuning in. Do spread the word. Once this is over, forward the links to folks. Continue to check out what's going on. Here at COP, spread the word about how it's impacting us. And on the immediate level, I think there's some petitions and things that are going around Brother Alat. Make sure you sign those, that you elevate that you promote that. That's real critical. Because he's on a water strike now. They are probably force feeding him and forcing, fluids into him to keep him alive. They don't want him to transition on this particular watch. That's very clear. We don't want him to transition at all. So we need to step up, putting pressure on to make sure that he gets out. So whatever you see coming out of that, make sure you spread the word, pass it around, sign it, put pressure on the Biden administration. And those of you who may be on the UK, I know some folks are listening from there. Last time, make sure the UK government, they follow through and do the same. That's also another government very critical to Egyptian trade and foreign relations. So let's all play our part. And we'll see y'all again on Tuesday, if not sooner. Take care.